Alright, fans of Middle-earth role-playing, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the Havens of Gondor, number 3300 in the campaign module set. And this deals with the lands of Belfalas. And the lands of Belfalas are right here, or Dor-en-Ernil, land of the prince, as is named, in Gondor. So you get to sail off the rugged seas off Gondor's south coast, where Corsairs of Umbar battle the majestic white ships of Dol Amroth. Here the elves built the great haven of Anthellon, and Galadriel erected the Seaward Tower, most famous beacon in all Middle-earth. Journey along the twisted seas of Dol Amroth, city of princes, and the bustling capital of Belfalas. This is a first edition book from 1987. I got this from Imperial Hobbies, probably back in 1989. Happened to find it. Can't remember what I paid for it. And it does give you 5 color page maps. So we'll take a look at the maps first. The first map you get is a regional map of Dor-en-Ernil, and you have also a bit of Lamadon in there at the far end, and of course you have Anthellon and Dol Amroth in the corners, as well as the Linhir. So it's a pretty cool map. It doesn't really connect very well with the next set of maps that I have, but oh well. And then you get a smaller, more map of the same thing, which gives a little more depth. So it comes up the Ether Anduin, and you get the exterior of Anthellon as well as the port caverns. So the port is on an island, and underneath the island is the actual port itself. Kind of a cool concept, almost like the old submarine layers. And then you get a layout of the Seaward Tower as well as the town of Linhir. Now they have a bridge here, but in Lord of the Rings, if you actually read the book, about the when Aragorn and the Grey Company come down with the army of the dead to Linhir. They're fighting over the fords at Linhir. So there's actually no bridge, just fords. So I'm kind of wondered about that. Maybe they destroyed the bridge to keep the Corsairs out, the Southern Army out. But it was called back contesting the fords at Linhir. So they have a bridge. I have no idea. So you pull this open and you get this really cool map of Dol Amroth and the Bay of White Ships. I think it's kind of cool. It's on a promontory. I think that's what it meant. Tolkien mentioned the city was on a promontory. He doesn't really go into a lot of detail, so Middle-earth role-playing filled everything out. And I thought it was a pretty cool map. So, let's delve into this book a little more. I like how the first you get some designs, ship designs. Haradrim merchant vessels, raiders, heavy progs, large slavers, and coastal raiders. So these are mostly Haradrim and Black Numenorean designs. So a prog would be like a bireme or triremes. So it's very much a rolling culture. Now we're not going to go into the guidelines and adapting this book in terms, because it's the same in every book. Every book has the same stuff. Goes in the introduction and history overview, which really isn't much to tell. The kings and ruling stewards of Gondor, so it gives you a king list, which again isn't really that important. It would have been better if they give you a prince list of all the princes that lived there. And then it goes into a history of Dor-en-Ernil from the coming of the Dain-Coentis, who are the ancestors of the Dunlanders, the coming of the elves and the founding of Anthellon, the founding of the Seaward Tower. Because Tolkien does mention in Unfinished Tales that Galadriel moved around a lot, and that she had stayed at a time by the sea. Now, why she didn't get the sea longing is another question to debate, but what can you do? And it has the arrival of the Numenoreans, and the founding of Gondor, and the founding of Dor-en-Ernil. So the Numenoreans who settled this area were for the most part of the faithful, not of the king's men who turned to evil and became the Black Numenoreans. These were Numenorean colonists who were faithful and are the Dunedain. So the founding of Dor-en-Ernil was by the house of Edhelion, and he was a name for the lord who captained a small fleet of fleeing faithful before the downfall. So this guy was already here. So they were already there, and they were granted this as their fief. We go on to the growth of Dol-Ernil, the founding of the town of Dol-Ernil, Dol Amroth. Then it talks about the kinstrife and the strengthening of Dor-en-Ernil. Now the kinstrife didn't really touch Dor-en-Ernil too much, but they were definitely involved in it. They were more in the middle, but they did ally with the rightful king against Castamir at the end. Goes into the Great Plague years, which was a disaster, the Gondor's gradual decline and the effects, and finally the renaming of Dol Amroth from the second House of Princes. So the first House of Princes died out and a second line was begun. During that time period, the Elf King Amroth of Lorien departed from Anthellon on a ship and was lost at sea as he tried to get his way back to Nimrodel. So with the end of House of Anthellon, King Ernil II of Gondor appointed Galador, the half-elven son of a noble Imrahil of Numenorean descent, and Mithralis, a sylvan elf companion of Nimrindil, so not exactly a highborn elf, as Lord of Dor-en-Ernil, the first of the second house of princes. And that was the line that kept right on through the War of the Ring. Then we start with the Corsair Invasions and the War of the Ring. But the city itself was only threatened once in the entire Corsair period, in 2758, when a Corsair invasion swept along the coastline. And though Dor-en-Ernil was not taken, it was definitely under threat. And then it gives you the people of Gondor, which are... Dor-en-Ernil itself is predominantly a Dunedain, but the interior would have a lot of Dunlending people, pre-Dunlending peoples. And then you get a Tale of Years. And it's got a shorter Tale of Years because it's further away from any action. So you go into obviously the geography of the whole area, which is quite large. Weather patterns, yay. Waves and currents, tides, plants and animals. It does mention the Isle of Belfalas, which is kind of cool in the coastal islets. And then you get the creatures. It talks about sea turtles and fell turtles, the Fastilian, which Tolkien only mentions in The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, that book. We go peoples and cultures, so the Dunedain of Dor-en-Ernil, how their attitudes and outlook, religion, family life, language, diet, garb, social classes, leisure, and appearances. The mountain folk were more like, are called the Haradrim, and then the common folk of the lowlands. So common folk are a mix of Haradrim and Dunedain, so they're called Lesser Dunedain, and they're mixed races. You have elves of Anthellon, and the Sinda aristocracy, and the Sylvan elves. So basically, Anthellon was just a port for the elves to flee across the ocean. They would build ships there and then they'd leave. But it had been years since they'd done that. Politics and power. So you have the prince at the top with the prince's vassals, the Haradrim, and the fief of Linhir. But in this case, they say Linhir is appointed by the king, not by the prince. So it's different. Then it's got the elves, warcraft, the prince's army and navy. One thing in Lord of the Rings, the War of the Ring, they never really mentioned what happened to Gondor's navy. Did Gondor's navy sally out to meet them in a vain attempt to slow them down? The prince obviously had his own little naval force. What did it do? Did it just watch, make sure that they didn't come that way? Now, the navy would have been in decline, would have been expensive, but they must have had some ships, because it does talk about how when they brought reinforcements to Minas Tirith, how there were like hundreds spared from the ships. So the navy must have went out into the water and done something. I wish Tolkien had gave more details. Moving on to politics and power. So it has the government of Gondor, but it's both an absolute monarchy plus it has a feudalism, and it becomes more and more apparent as the line of kings dies out and the stewards take over. It becomes more of a feudal power invested in the steward, who's more or less a king without the title, and the prince of Dol-Amroth would be the next most high in charge. Why he didn't become the king instead? Because he's not of the line of Isildur. That's about the only reason. Though they would have probably intermarried with the royal family over the course of years, but who knows. So the way it works in Dol-Ernil, there you got the prince's vassals, so he has his own feudal system. Then he has the people of the Haradrim, which were the original inhabitants. The fief of Linhir, so Linhir is part of his domain, but the lord is directly appointed by the king. It's kind of a check and balance, because it would be the second most important port in the province. And Linhir does provide a large portion of Dol-Ernil's army and fleet. Then you have the elves of Anthellon, but by the Lord of the Rings, those elves appeared. Warcraft, which is what I love. The prince has his own army and navy, which makes sense, because it is a port. What bothered me most about the War of the Ring, Tolkien never mentioned how big of an influence the navy was. You never hear about any naval battle between Gondor and the fleets of the Corsairs and the Haradrim that were coming out of Umbar. He just mentions that there was a fleet approaching the mouth of the Anduin, and mentions that hundreds more were spared from the ships when reinforcements were sent from the southern fiefs to Minas Tirith. He never really mentions any naval battle. Did the Gondorian fleet, as it was, try and intercept the huge fleet before it reached them? Was there a naval battle at Pelargir? Or was there one before Linhir? There's no real mention. Obviously the prince would have had a small naval fleet, as well as some standing garrisons. Remember, he sent 700 men-at-arms plus all of his knights to Minas Tirith. So that's another thing that bothered me. Why didn't he take command of the southern forces, leading his men-at-arms and knights at the Battle of Linhir or Battle of Pelargir? That would have freed up more men from Lossark to go help with Minas Tirith. But the prince probably saw that he was needed more in Minas Tirith than he was in the south, which might have proved kind of wrong, because Aragorn hadn't gone down there, Linhir might have fell. So you have the knights, or Roquian, and they are the heavy cavalry of Gondor by this stage. You would have obviously had esquires, which are Otars, which would have made up his medium cavalry. Then they have what's called the Prince's Yeomen, kind of like rangers. The men-at-arms. So, like I said, in Lord of the Rings, he sent 700 men-at-arms were sent from Dor-en-Ernil to Minas Tirith to help with the battle there. How many remained behind and how many were sent to Linhir remains questionable. Then you have the militia, which is every man for themselves. Talks about the military organization. So the army of Gondor would have a cavalry vanguard, a center, where the commander, his guards, and the bulk of the infantry and baggage train are located. 3 and 4 are right and left wings, commanded by the general's chief subordinates, and 5 are rear guard. This is mentioned in the Unfinished Tales during the disaster that befell the Gondorian Northern Army at Dagorlad against the Wain Riders. Then it has the fleet, has war galleys. Talks about the Elven military groups, which are not very big, obviously, and disappear by the War of the Ring. Eredin military groups, which would be more like chieftains and clans. Then we got the life of the court of the prince, which is more like a feudal court with tournaments and stuff like that. Yay. Goes into alliance and conflicts, relations between the prince and the Haradrim. Obviously, you can't antagonize too much the local populace, or things can happen. Umbar and Harad, obviously there would be a lot of trade during times of peace, but during times of war, there would have been a lot of raiding and counter-raiding. Especially when Sauron was rising, there would have been more and more raids. There would have been trade up until the time of the War of the Ring, or Sauron's second rising, but it would have been harder and harder to trade with the south. Most trade would have been coastal, between Pelargir and Linhir and Dol Amroth. The economy, they would have traded with Arnor at the time, and Arthedain, as well as Lindon and Cardolan, and Tharbad, the city of Tharbad. But as Arnor fell more and more into decay and finally collapsed, the Three Kingdoms period collapsed, trade with the north would have been minimized. Trade with the Elves of Anthellon, again, would have totally disappeared by the War of the Ring. So you had currency tables, yep. Organizations, so you got the nobility, the merchants, guilds, masters of power, privateers. Because there would have been, as well as the raids from Corsairs and Umbarians and Haradrim, they would have had their own counter raids. Privateer ship tactics, captured prizes, smugglers, thieves, all these things would have happened. Thieves of Linhir, mountain bandits, spies. Now, people of note. Now, it doesn't give a lot of names. It has the House of Dor-en-Ernil, from Athelion, the faithful Númenorian, to Edrihil, the grandson of Eredhil. He was slain by the Witch King in single combat before the gates of Minas Morgul. So it says, okay, in 2004. Then you have the House of Dol Amroth by Galador, all the way to Imrahil. So it doesn't give a complete line of the princes, and it gives you only a few. Prince Celadril is the prince in the mid-Third Age. So we got some NPCs of Dol Amroth, like every book has. Characters from Linhir again, who's in charge. The Elves of Anthellon, who are still there. Other interesting figures. You even got a Prince of Darkness called Cathog, who's trying to win over the local Haradrim. Now, going into Dol Amroth, it gives you the overview of the city defenses, architecture, the city plan, like the port and all that stuff, layouts, which is kind of cool to read through what's in a town. It's your typical port town. It'd have an old town, a gate town, castle quarter, then the castle of the prince, and the Seaward Tower, which was built by Galadriel, or built during Galadriel's stay in that area. And then you got the Elf Haven of Anthellon, its description and layout. Not much really to do there. Other sites of note, like the town of Linhir. So the town of Linhir was very important during the War of the Ring, as that's where Angbor the Fearless was holding back the army from Umbar and Harad from penetrating into Dor-en-Ernil and into Lemedon. They had already taken much of Lemedon by that time. So it gives a description of that town, as well as the key to the city, which we have. Another castle, it gives an example castle, Arumnir. You know, your typical castle that they have. A coastal tower, a mountain village. Pukal men of Galabur. So there would have been Pukal men, which were the Wozes. They would have been in that region long before the Dunedain, the Númenorians. And it disappeared by that time, mostly. And you have the Hill of the Prior, which is like a Dark Years worship area. Finally, we get into something interesting. Ships. Something that they haven't mentioned before. You have ships of Umbar, you have ships of Dol Amroth, and the ships of Anthellon. So you have like raider dromons, war dromons, coastal patrol, merchant cog, and a Haradrim trader. Amroth would be like a war galley, coastal patrol, privateer, carrack, and then cogs. And it gives a description of the number of men, rowers, and total crew. Ships of Anthellon would have the Celebrus, which is a silver cleaver, Aran, the sea wanderer, and the Palanin, which is a sunset rounder, carrack. Which is kind of cool. Elven ship designs are more for open ocean, going across the Undying Lands, while ships of Umbar and ships of Amroth are more for coastal hugging. It's not often you see biremes and triremes in open ocean water. I thought that was cool. I've used this book and some other books that have it for sea adventures, because I had a ship, a model ship that was really cool, but it's long been broken. And adventures, really there's not much you can do Dol Amroth wise, adventure wise, as far as great adventures go. A Bell in the Lost Tower, yay. Theft in Linhir, that's a Thieves Guild one. A light on the Hill of the Pyre, so you get to discover whatever dark Saronic cults are still around. Sounds like Return of the Jedi, the dark side. You got other suggested adventures for beginning characters. So be a privateer captain, stop a privateer, make patrols. Nothing too special. The Master Military Table is what I was really interested in. This gives an idea of the Prince's army at the time of the mid-Third Age, which is what I liked. Yeah, it says here men-at-arms, they'd have 2,000 to 2,500 men-at-arms. So it makes sense. They send 700 to Minas Tirith and had the rest at home. Then they have the Corsairs Haradrim, but they don't give any numbers for them, which really sucked. I wish they had given a number for the Corsairs and Haradrim. Would have been much cooler to have. Elves of Anthellon, they only like 100 and 180. So you get the mountain folk of the Haradrim, what they bring, how many chieftains, shamans, warriors, and villagers, mountain bandits, smugglers, guild thieves, warrior monks, all sorts. Warrior monks, again, that's a D&D thing, or a Rollmaster role-playing thing, not a Lord of the Rings thing. And you got the Court of Dol Amroth, the NPC, Master Military Charts, Master Beast Table, Master Encounter Table, and your terminology. So that is the Havens of Gondor in a nutshell. I love the Master Military Table. I love the maps. I do. It doesn't quite fit in with the next module's maps. Like, they don't quite piece together quite right. I wish they had done that. Eventually they will get that right. But it does look cool when you have all these maps together and you piece them as best as you can, and you get a huge super map. I always thought that was cool. As far as playing goes, other than little simple adventures, your common like thieves, catch bandits, catch thieves, go on a ship is about the best thing you can do. But there's really not much you can do in the Bay of Belfalas. It's well defended, and you could catch smugglers and stuff and tour the islands. The best thing to do would be to hire a ship and get a crew of people in Dol Amroth, and then start raiding the Haradrim coast. That'd be the best thing you could do. Other than that, adventures in Dor-en-Ernil is kind of boring. There's much better places. So this campaign book could have had better adventures. They maybe should have added Lamadon in this and Phalas, expanded it. But it is what it is, and it is a good book, but not a great book. But I am glad that Middle-earth role-playing went this direction and came down to this region that Tolkien barely touches upon, except for in Unfinished Tales with a story about Galadriel and Celeborn and Amroth and Nimrodel. But anyway, as my furnace is kicking in again, that's all I have for today. Anyone else out there who plays Middle-earth role-playing and loves the MERP game, let me know if you guys had this book, what you guys thought of it, how well did you guys think it played, and leave comments in the section, subscribe, hit the like button, whatever. I'm going to keep putting these out there as I have the entire set. Until next time, this is Roman Daysel. I'm out of here.